Everybody, welcome to our last session on the third day, and we are going to talk about RtII for SLD. And I am very excited to have such a knowledgeable and expert group in the room with me. We didn't record the introductions, but it's exciting to have school psychologists and classroom teachers and special ed teachers joining us, and speech and language pathologists. So I hope that if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm going to launch into our session today. And my name is Tanya Moret. I'm the Training and Consultation Supervisor. So you've had a chance to meet with a lot of the tech over the last 3 days. They are an amazing staff, and they provide support that is IDEA funded to any of you in public schools. So if any of the information over the last 3 days, and our LIU staff too, so we're there to support all of you. If any of the topics really kind of grabbed your interest and you want to know what you can do further, you can either contact me, there's my information, or any of the techs that you had the opportunity to sit with in the sessions. I know you know these, so I'm not going to go over them, although I just, engagement is so helpful. So I do appreciate if you either share with us auditorily or through your audio, or if you share with us visually your video. That's always helpful for me because I like to see everybody's face, know if I'm clear in what I'm telling folks. And then we have, I just checked before we signed on, almost all of the session recordings have all been linked. So if you missed any, in order to qualify for the free book, our first 100 folks, you can go back and watch one of the sessions that you missed in order to get your 5. You need to attend and review 5 sessions by Friday at 5 o'clock. So these are, well, it would help if I have the right PowerPoint for us. Actually, it looks like I need to fix a couple things. I did a cut and paste and forgot to remove some of these, so I apologize. There we go. So let's talk about our outcomes for today. So first of all, we just want to make sure that we're clear between what is meant by RtII and MTSS. I've been in this business a long time, so for me, I stumble a little when I say RtI because I always want to say RtII. I was a TAC consultant at Capital Area IU for almost 15 years. So, well, 10 years, I should say, for 10 years. And when I was supporting schools, it started out as RtI, then RtII, we called it RtI squared. And so I just want to make sure we're clear between those two major initiatives. I also want to talk about the benefits of using an RtI determination over the ability discrepancy model. I'm not going to go into a lot of real deep detail. I'm not a school psychologist, so I'm going to talk about what the experts have said and share some of the research that gives us an indication that an RtI process is actually very beneficial. We're going to, as we go through and I talk about what are the pieces in an RtI process, I want you to think about informally, where is your school in terms of readiness? Because if you decide that you're going to apply to use RtI for SLD, the process will actually begin with a self-assessment that will probably be done by me or one of my staff members. We will come in and actually help you complete the self-assessment. Now, before we launch into this, because I know that we have had a long 5 days and I want to kind of focus us in, I'm really trying to be in tune with the adult mindfulness and social emotional learning. I want to ask you to engage with me in an exercise to kind of get us ready. And so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to do this activity. It's called 5 senses. And the first thing is I want you to use the first sense, which is your sight, and I want you to look around. And I don't want you to just look at your screen. Brittany, I think it was Brittany, I'm jealous you're outside. So I want you to look around and tell me what, or think about what you see. Not just objects, but notice textures. Notice, notice the shapes of things. Notice the colors, right? Think of 5, or just I pick out 5 different things that maybe at first glance you hadn't seen before. Give you a chance to do that. So as you're looking around, tell me just in the chat one thing that you see. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the depth and breadth of what you shared. So now let's bring awareness to our next sense, which is feeling. Bring awareness to 4 things that you are currently feeling. It might be the texture of your shirt, or for those of you who are outside, the feel of the warmth of the sun. Take about 20 seconds and try to identify 4 things that you are currently feeling. Share in the chat. I see the breeze, paper, okay? What else do you feel? I'm jealous of the breeze. Melanie has her shoes off. That's fantastic. I love them. Yes. So some good and some reminding us that, we've been sitting all day, or maybe that we're not as young as we used to be. Yeah. So now let's think about our hearing. Take a moment to listen and note 3 things that you hear in the background. Could be an animal outside. For me, it's the hum of the air conditioner. It might even be sounds made by some guests or other members who are in your family right now. I'll give you about 15 seconds. 3 things you can hear. Erin, I'm coming over, so just give me the address, right? You've got the pool going on. How about 2 things that you can smell? What are some things that you smell that you usually filter out? They could be pleasant or unpleasant. That's okay, Dave. If I put my mask on, I'll smell something. Oh, fabric softener. I wonder if my My clothes smell like my perfume. Red beets. Ooh, Tori's making food. All right, and one last thing, something you can taste. Focus on the thing that you can taste right now at this moment. It might be the last sip of coffee you have, or maybe you're chewing a piece of gum. It might be something you have a taste for. Ooh. So I know that this is just an opportunity for us to take a deep breath and to kind of center ourselves, because so often, whether it's professional development or we're in meetings, don't you always feel like you're going? And it really is an opportunity for us to take a breath, to kind of center ourselves, appreciate what we see around us. And now we'll talk about RtI for SLD determination. Hopefully that little break and relaxation gives you the stamina and the strength to finish strong for the day. Thank you. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the difference, right? Making sure we understand the difference between RtI and MTSS. So at the very basic comparison, you've got MTSS as this big blue circle. It's the big system. It's all the component parts. And then you have RtI, which is this smaller piece that can exist outside of MTSS. Needs to be, in order to function, is a process that relies on the fact that MTSS components are present. So what does that mean, right? The MTSS system, the goal of an MTSS system really is not related to special education, is not directly related. It's to identify any students who might have gaps in their learning or their behavior, and as quickly as possible, provide them with increasingly intense levels of instruction and intervention until gaps are closed. And I think that's one of the key pieces about this, is that sense of urgency with MTSS, right? It's that constant monitoring, and as at the first sign that something is not working, we're in and checking, right? We're doing something. And that system needs some very key elements to function effectively. First, what we are using to make decisions about, right, to find those gaps, are reliable and valid assessments that are either universally screening all students or progress monitoring the students who have emerged with gaps. And so, without having a universal screening component in place for literacy, for math, it's very difficult to be able to identify the gaps that aren't, to have data to support what gaps are perceived not to be part of the in the student's repertoire of skills. The next component is that what students have access to, right, in order to assume that these gaps are valid, is explicit and differentiated core instruction. Everybody gets it, all of them, right? We're not taking core instruction and giving it to those students who seem to be doing well, and those who are struggling, pull them out of core instruction to give them something else. There's an expectation of guaranteed and viable curriculum that is using evidence-based practices. Now, I didn't say evidence-based in explicit and differentiated core instruction, but that's an assumption. And then when we find those students who have gaps, we are using those valid and reliable assessments to drive the instructional decisions that we make. And those instructional decisions are guiding us towards evidence-based interventions, scientifically validated protocols that we know when used with fidelity are designed and show evidence that those gaps get closed. You know, we don't have time to waste on interventions that are not, that don't have an evidence base to them. I spend a lot of time in MTSS sessions talking about what we mean by evidence base. ESSA gives us the 4 tiers, right? We need to know that the research protocols have been followed and that the results have been validated and that we're looking at those results and we're looking at the effect and that we're making sure we're using them in the way in which that research was conducted. And we have those evidence-based interventions for academic and behavioral needs. If any of you have ever gone to interventioncentral.org or the IRIS Center or the RtII network, those are places, or even the What Works Clearinghouse. So much work has been done to say, here's what works. We don't have time to waste on the stuff that doesn't. And then finally, ongoing professional development. If anybody feels like they've arrived at MTSS, we need to go back to the drawing board because it's something we're always learning and we're always getting better at. So that's the goal of MTSS. How does response to instruction kind of connect with that? Well, this MTSS system, right, which is this well-oiled machine, within that, we've got response to instruction. And the goal of that is to collect, analyze, and act upon data on student performance to inform a comprehensive evaluation to determine eligibility for a specific learning disability. When response to instruction was first imagined and promoted, it really had a special education, it was really driven by special education. Now, MTSS is for all students. Response to instruction is a process that allows us to harness what we collect from MTSS and look at it for the purposes of, are we able to meet this child's needs in the core or even with more intensive intervention? Or do we have to reconsider and determine and look at eligibility for a specific learning disability? The reason we get so confused between the two is because as you look down over this list, what's part of response to instruction? Well, first of all, reliable and valid assessments. And those assessments are actually measuring a student's response to either the instruction they've received in the tier 1 or the instruction they receive in tier 2 or tier 3, which is what we've called intervention, right? We need to know that those students have accessed good core instruction. And we need to document when those gaps are reveal themselves or those students reveal those gaps. We need to document which interventions we're trying and how we're matching that student need to that intervention. And just matching and using the intervention isn't enough, right? We need to have rules or decision rules that we determine when do we deem that this intervention is effective or not effective. And if we don't think it's effective, what documentation do we have that we've changed to try and increase the likelihood the student will respond? And in terms of professional development, yes, we need professional development, but we also need educators who have the most expertise in a particular domain, literacy, math, writing. We need to know that the people with the most expertise are working with the students who have the most intense needs. Because we want to be sure, you heard Dr. Jung this morning, and I was the one actually who said, why do students struggle? Well, one of the reasons is because they might be a curriculum casualty. And so this prevents us from identifying a student for a specific learning disability versus a student who just didn't have access to the best educational services. So I'm going to stop there before I go to the quiz. And I'm going to look at the chat. Are there any questions about that? Because that is key to everything that we're talking about. You can unmute yourself or you can put in the chat. Are there any pieces of that that you're like, I'm not sure how these two work together?
Tanya, I feel like I missed some of the things that you mentioned because my internet just booted me out for a while there, you know?
Okay.
And I was struggling, and I was actually trying to call Comcast at the same time, trying to figure out what was going on. But, you know, luckily I got back on without them trying to reboot my router, which I don't want them to do because then I'll disrupt my thing. So is there any way you could kind of like, you know, just
you
go
want me
right
to
before
summarize?
this? Huh?
I can summarize.
Okay, I'd appreciate it.
I would say that we cannot have response to instruction if we don't have MTSS. But we can have MTSS without having response to instruction. Because MTSS is the system that puts all the pieces together, and those pieces, many of which are the same things that we see in the response to instruction process. It's just there with a more specific purpose. So in MTSS, our goal is to look at all students, find the ones who have gaps, and figure out how to catch them up as quickly as possible using the best educational tools. And when I say best educational tools, ones that have an evidence base. Whereas response to instruction is kind of, we're stepping back and we're seeing how that process has kind of rolled out. And at some point, we're making a decision that says, you know what? We are using some of the best evidence-based practices we can, and we're still not seeing a student make the gains that we think they should. And so perhaps this data should be used specifically in a comprehensive evaluation, because we're starting to believe that despite our best efforts, this student is not making the growth. And so it's not a measure of access or achievement or performance. There's something else going on, which is how we're getting to that disability.
Okay, so this is more of a finer filter than the other one. The other one's more of a broad filter, and then this is like kind of a finer one to fine tune exactly what is going on with that particular student or those particular maybe A, B students, or, you know.
And RtI is really, so, you know, when we think about a comprehensive evaluation and we're looking at students who may be eligible because they have a disability, right? We've got many disability categories. And I think one of the misconceptions is that we're using RtI for any student for any potential disability. Really, response to instruction is most valid for determining eligibility for a student with a specific learning disability. The processes and the data we collect and the analysis we do can inform an evaluation for a student for whom we may suspect there are other disabilities. So it's all good data, but a response to instruction process is really looking specifically at the eligibility determination for a specific learning disability. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so now the interactive part. You guys got really good with your thumbs up, thumbs down, right? I'm going to pull up my participants so I can see it. Based on what I've said, where do you land here? Within a tiered system, MTSS, and an RtII assessment process, schools identify students at risk for poor learning outcomes. They monitor student progress, provide evidence-based interventions. The intensity and nature of instruction intervention is adjusted based on student response and growth toward benchmarks. Is this true or false? Go ahead and weigh in. Thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you think? Thumbs up, it's true. Thumbs down, it's false. I got 2 thumbs up. What do the rest of you think? All right, if you were leery of putting your thumbs up, know that that was the answer. That is true. So that's why we get so much confusion, because there's so many pieces of this process that belong to both. So go ahead. Somebody gonna ask? Now here's a second question. All schools may use the response to intervention approach for SLD determination, true or false? Okay, I see one thumbs up. I see a thumbs down. Thank you, Whitley. Anybody else? I see a thumbs down. Okay. The answer to this is actually false. To be approved, I guess there's a little nuance here in the word may, right? In that any school in Pennsylvania, and this is specific to Pennsylvania, any school in Pennsylvania can apply to use a response to intervention approach for SLD determination, but currently only 3% of the schools in Pennsylvania have been approved for it. And so the process to get that approval means that you have been approved because you have an MTSS system that's working with fidelity. Now, I don't have this as a question in here, but I'm just going to ask the question. Do you think that you could be approved for an RtII approach for some areas of an SLD determination and not others? In other words, if we think about our three domains are reading, math, and writing. Can you be approved for an RtII approach for reading, but not for math and writing? I'm not sure if these are from the last one. I forgot to clear all. But the answer is actually yes, you can, because in Pennsylvania, we only just started approving for writing and for math. We've had the approval available for reading for a while now. In fact, when I was at the capital area, I was involved in some of the very first schools that, you know, I was part of the review team to look at the applications. So reading was one of the first areas to be approved. So I wanted to talk just a little bit, just briefly, about this idea of specific learning disability, right? You know, because the question is like, well, what has changed? I can tell you what hasn't changed is the definition, right? The definition of a specific learning disability goes all the way back to 1975. What has, and to that end, right, we have, what was promoted was that the best marker to conceptualize a specific learning disability was a significant discrepancy between the IQ and achievement. So that's the discrepancy model. And as part of that, for specific learning disability, we had to rule out other potential factors, whether it was vision, motor, limited English proficiency, etc. And so we were left with an inclusionary and an exclusionary piece when identifying specific learning disabilities, right? So our inclusion was that we were looking specifically at reading, at writing, or at math. And we had students who were failing to meet age or grade level state standards. Really that they were failing to meet the same performance levels as students in their community. And we had to rule out that there wasn't some other reason why. What did change though in 2004, and actually to say 2004 feels very definitive, it was more of a process. But in 2004, the eligibility criteria to determine a specific learning disability was changed. The federal government said you no longer are required to make schools use a discrepancy approach, and that you must allow for the school district to use a child's response to scientific research-based interventions as a way to consider a specific learning disability. You may use, and in fact, you may use alternative research-based procedures, which is where RtI comes in, right? If you think about it, RtI is, it makes use of both the scientific-based intervention, the student's response to it, and then it's a local decision. And so districts are looking at those alternative procedures for identifying where students are to be performing. So this comprehensive evaluation now includes 2 more inclusionary/exclusionary pieces.
Tanya?
Yes.
I was wondering, and this might be slightly off topic. If it is, I apologize. But like, is there any legal opinions out there in terms of whether or not RtI has been stood up or as being an effective means by which to identify a student with a learning disability versus the discrepancy model? I had asked that a few years ago, and there wasn't a whole lot out there, but I know some districts have been fearful of moving to something new because of that.
Well, so that's a great question, and one that I don't have data to answer that. But what I do have is some information from some of the current researchers around not necessarily the, well, let's put it this way. I can tell you that Mark Shin, and I actually reference him in here, if we're looking at the body of data that we have for students who've been identified for a specific learning disability, using the discrepancy model or assuming the cognitive approach, right? That it's intrapersonal, that it's that by using the IQ assessment and looking at a system of or pattern of strengths and weaknesses, we can identify accurately what a child needs and then put in place what that child needs and see positive results, as right? So that's what the research, if they're doing the research, would look at, right? And I don't see her face, so I'm looking for the nod. If I want to make sure I'm on the right track of what you're asking.
Yes.
Okay, well, what Mark Shin has found is that the likelihood, oh, and I actually have the percentage, I think I have it in one of my slides, I'll have to look. The percentage of students who actually have progressed to the point of being exited and no longer in need of specially designed instruction. Well, I guess I would ask you, how's it working for you right now? What is the success rate of catching kids up based on the old way of doing things?
Well, I mean, as a school psychologist, I mean, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, I know I have colleagues that would argue with me, I hate IQ tests, which is really funny because it's like I'm the person that gives a million of them, and it's like a main function of my job. But I just think I personally don't find them especially valuable in a large number of cases in which I'm evaluating students. There are moments where certain aspects of information, I do glean some information that is a little bit helpful. But as a whole,
they're not discrete enough. They're not giving us that instructional piece, right?
Right. It doesn't lead you down to isolate areas of skill deficit in a good way, or in a very precise way, I guess you should say. So it actually frustrates me knowing that that's what the expectation is of what our evaluations are supposed to be producing.
Well, and actually, Dave, I really appreciate you saying this, and I'm going to scoot ahead here just for a second because we worked off some assumptions for a very long time, right? And some of those assumptions are that, and I'm talking about pre-RtI, okay? So thinking about how we used the discrepancy model to identify students with a specific learning disability. We assumed that there were educational assessment procedures that were already valid and that those procedures, those existing assessments, could tell us what students need. which is exactly what you were just expressing your frustration about. You know, when you're looking at a processing score, what is that really telling you about what they need in the classroom when they're learning their decoding, right? How is that connecting?
Yeah, now I will say this, okay? So I'm just going to put this out there.
Mhm.
I mean, there are a number of colleagues that I have out there who would fight tooth and nail about everything that I had just said. And there are some studies out there that talk about certain aspects of like rapid automatic naming, you know, for example, has been shown to be highly correlated with, you know, the emergence of various literacy skills and all of that, which might be tied into processing speed. I mean, there's different things that people could go and explore.
Correlated, like you're using terms that leave a lot of room.
Yes. So, but, you know, I do want to at least not just put my biases and everything out on the table, but also recognize the fact that if there were other people who suddenly joined this Zoom session and heard me speaking, they would probably, you know, set me out for a lynching. So, you know, yeah.
And one of the things I was watching some national webinars kind of to get ready for this, because this is an area that I used to be very knowledgeable about and kind of walked away from for a little while. And getting ready for today, I was listening, and I was listening to Jack Fletcher speak out of Florida, and I'm sorry, not Florida, Texas. And listening to them, you know, one of the things we want to be cognizant of is we're not saying to school psychologists what you've been doing all along is wrong. Like that's not the message. The message really is we did the best we could with what we had based on what we knew and what we thought we knew. And one of the things we thought we knew, or we thought was the situation, is that the tests we were using were the right ones and were doing what we needed them to do. And now as we go back and we have different measures that have more discrete results, more sensitive results to the skills that students need in order to move forward, I feel like, and I forget who the researcher was one time who said, you know what, we're smarter now. We're starting to learn other methods and other not methodologies, other tools. You know, we also believe that we had sufficient resources that differentiated instruction was entirely possible in a classroom. So those students who may have been caught in that curriculum casualty net, right? Because they weren't getting the right number of presentations in order to move forward, which maybe their elbow partner had enough instruction to move forward. We assume that in that classroom, the teacher had everything they needed in order to differentiate effectively. And you know what? That set teachers up, because looking at all of the pre-service programs that are out there, looking at what teachers come to the table with, looking at the opposing viewpoints of what is good literacy instruction or what is good math instruction, we really put them into a situation where their hearts were in the right place. They wanted to provide that differentiated instruction, but the reality was they didn't have sufficient resources or they didn't have sufficient professional development. And we're feeling the effects now because we're trying to catch folks up. But some of what we've learned is very recent. And by recent, I'm talking the last 20 years, but how many teachers on this call have been teaching for at least 10 or 15 years? We may not have been receiving some of that in our current instruction. We also work off the assumption that understanding the interpersonal cause of educational problems is the most critical factor in determining appropriate treatment. That's not to say that isn't the case for some students, and for some students for whom there are more discrepant and more intensive needs. But for students with specific learning disabilities, there's too much variation, there's too much opportunity to make false assumptions or to make false analyses. And then matching treatments to underlying characteristics will result in maximally effective interventions. That's only going to work if you find the right treatment to match what the student needs. I mean, think about it. I was teaching when some of our comprehension strategies, some of our comprehension programs were put in place. Well, you got a comprehension intervention, whether what you needed was phonology development or phonics or fluency, right? We kind of threw one size fits all intervention at kids, not really thinking about where were they on the continuum of development, where was the gap. We didn't have tools that were discrete enough or sensitive enough to find the specific skill gaps of students. And part of that is because we didn't understand what the skill gaps were. And it wasn't that we were trying to be, it wasn't, what's the word? It wasn't educational malpractice, because we were working off of what the best was we had at that time. So thanks, Dave. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think you bring up a really good point. And I'm going to make a note of, it's a good thing for me to have in here is some whatever might be current and researchable. I know with Evidence for ESSA, and I know with the What Works Clearinghouse, when you look at the interventions, they have cited the process of looking at data, analyzing the data, matching students to the specific skills, and looking at the progress students have made. Those are some of the highest rated evidence pieces that are in Evidence for ESSA or What Works Clearinghouse or Intervention Central. So we do have evidence that when we find the right skill that students need, we're seeing progress at an accelerated rate. So I just want to go back here, make sure I don't forget. So there's in working with schools who have been trying to think, is it worth it for us to do an RtII approach? Is it worth it for us to go down that road? Because it just feels like so much work, right? It's a lot of moving pieces. And to that I say, well, so in other words, if we're not going to use an RtII approach, then we're not going to bother with evidence-based instruction. We're just going to continue using what we think to be as our best guess. Or we're not going to use assessment strategically to find kiddos that may be in need of more than what the core is going to provide. We're going to rely on our old kind of, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to suggest that maybe this kiddo might go move on for a referral, or I'm going to wait for the student to bubble up and reveal themselves rather than to be proactive about it, right? The idea of, what impact does failing have on a student? What impact does that social emotional tragedy have on future progress? Whereas, so it's okay to continue to inflict on students the fact that they may fail. Instead, if we're using RtI, we're catching them before they fail. We're building those successes more quickly and with fewer instances of failure. I know some of you on this call have known me for a while, and so you may have already heard me speak about the subjectivity of grading. And what does grading really tell us about a student's progress, right? Using progress monitoring formatively to determine how a student is advancing, using progress monitoring and student growth percentiles to determine how are they moving forward in relation to their age mate peers, but also, looking at it through a normative lens, so much more or so much less subjective than the grading practices we currently employ. And what does an A really tell us? What does a making improvement really tell us? And I love Dr. Young's comments today about general ed and special ed, and the fact that, we are sharing ownership of our students. And I feel that when the RtI approach is not, if we're not moving toward an RtI approach, we still have an us versus them mentality in terms of, well, that's not my student. That student's a learning support student, or that's your student. Now we need to integrate our services and all be held accountable for the progress and success of our students. these are just some of the comments that Shin had shared in 2017, and I found that they were very poignant in answering the question, why should I even bother with RTI? Even if you never use, let me go back here just for a sec, even if you never formally apply for RTI, isn't it beneficial for all our students if we're at least working towards an RTI approach? Because it means we're putting a lot of these really much better practices, evidence-based practices in place. So here's another quiz. All schools may use response to intervention methodologies within their multi-tiered system. True or false? What do you think? And by methodologies, if you're not sure what I mean by methodologies, they represent that practice of informing student growth or response to high quality instruction, right? It's that, and the fact that when students are evidencing gaps, we're increasing the level of intensity of the intervention that we're providing to them. So what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Yes, this is a thumbs up. We can use the methodology in an MTSS system. We're just not necessarily using that methodology for SLD determination. And so even if we're just using pieces of it, it's better than nothing. Though we want to get to a place where we're using more of those elements. Students are permitted to move back and forth between levels of a multi-tiered system of support. True or false? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up, yes. How easy is it and flexible is a system for a student to move in and out of support in terms of a student with a learning disability and receiving special ed services? The beauty of it is that even a student with an SLD determination can still move back and forth between the levels of multi-tiered systems of support. So here's where the rubber kind of meets the road a little bit, and it's something that you need to know. When schools use MTS as a system and RTI as an assessment process, can they delay or deny a referral for special education? True or false? So I saw a lot of thumbs down, and I'm gonna clarify this. If a school district does not believe that a student has a potential learning disability, they can't just deny the referral. They would have to formally respond to that request through a NOREP and explain why they feel the student does not meet why they don't believe the student is potentially in need or to potentially move forward in the evaluation process. So I often get this question when I'm talking about gifted, right? There are times when parents may make a referral for a student, and the question is, can a district deny that? They can, but they have got to have all of their information solid if they're going and submit it through a NOREP with a rationale, because that would give the parent an opportunity to agree or disagree. And so I would caution anyone to use that assessment process to delay or deny a referral if the system is not in place with fidelity, because then you don't have the data to back up the rationale as to why you believe the student is just needs more time to respond to instruction and intervention. Any questions about that? Because that's really a critical piece. Okay. The RTI process in and of itself replaces the need for a comprehensive evaluation when a disability is suspected. True or false? Oh, we've done RTI, so we don't need to, so it's already a done deal. Okay, I saw some thumbs down. Good. Right? This does not take the place of a comprehensive evaluation. There is still a need. When you look at that, and I think I have it here, yep. We still have to make sure that we're identifying what is the area of the student's potential disability. We have to make sure that we're ruling out other possibilities. Need to make sure that the evaluation is sufficient in scope and sequence, that we have included all of the members that are required as part of the evaluation. Often an RtI process is very limited, right? We're talking about the teacher, excuse me, the student, the intervention, whoever's providing the intervention. It's not sufficient in and of itself to take the place of a comprehensive evaluation. And so, we want to think of the comprehensive evaluation as a holistic data gathering process, of which RtI is one, right? And granted, that RtI process is going to inform a lot of what we need as part of our evaluation, but we need to make sure we're looking at multiple criteria and coordinating that effort with maybe historical data, juxtaposing it to current data. We need to consider related services. Depending upon the age of the student, we need to consider post-secondary outcomes. The data is really going to drive the educational needs, and the RtI data that we collect will be a big part of that, but in and of itself is not the only piece. It will, though, if it's done well, will help us limit some unnecessary assessments. There is no need to do an IQ assessment, a cognitive assessment, in addition to collecting the RtI data. There was a question that was asked, and nobody's asked it here, but I want to bring it up. The regulations, the way they read, are really an or, right? You're going to use an alternative, or you're going to use the current discrepancy model. Or a combination of both, okay? But what you can't do is use an RtI methodology, an evaluation that relies solely on the RtI process among these other areas without the discrepancy piece for one student. And then for another student for whom you're looking at SLD determination, using little or no RtI data and using the discrepancy model. So in other words, whatever your locally defined process is, if you choose to integrate both of them, then you need to do that for all students. And actually, some of the research, or I won't say research, some of the recommendations are that until you've collected enough data, right, to be able to step back and look at your RtI process and your discrepancy model process, until you're ready to, you have enough data to look at that holistically, you allow both of them to be part of it. And then eventually, once you feel as if the RtI data that you've collected, the assessments you're using, are really finding what you need and are identifying students and you're not missing them, then you can change your process. So I'm looking at my time. Oh, I have 3 minutes. Can RtI be used to satisfy the child find mandate? What do you think? True or false? Oops. An RtI process, and actually an RtI process cannot be used to satisfy a child find mandate, but an MTSS process can. Because if you think about it, right, an RtI process, you're already limiting who you're actually going to look at. An MTSS process, however, is one that looks at all children. So an MTSS system can be used to satisfy child find, but an RtI process cannot.
But you also, with the child find mandate, you have to consider even kids that are non-public. So kids that are not even within your own specific schools, there's still a child find mandate for them, and we don't have control over that. Right. So thank you, Dave. And that's a good qualifier to mention that, I'm looking at this from the local standpoint, but you're right. The non-public schools, you still,
That's still an area that, you know, we're not going into those non-public schools and forcing universal screening upon them and forcing them to use good data. Though I've worked with several public schools who are accepting students from either charter schools or non-public schools. And in doing so, as they, and by accepting, I mean conducting the evaluation, what they've done is they've built into their process some of these questions that if they have an MTSS system, they are meeting with those schools and saying, okay, tell us about your universal screening. And obviously these schools are saying, well, we don't have one. And so at least it's opening up the conversation to say, maybe it would be in your best interest to develop some universal screening. So you're absolutely right. 3 domains for SLD, I already talked about these. I just want to get to the very end, which is the process, because we're out of time. If your district is interested in applying to use RtII for SLD determination, the applications, I'm sorry, not the applications, the intent to apply is due by September 30th to the Patent MTSS regional lead. And I actually put Jen Collins' email down here at the bottom in the notes. I don't know if you can see this, but I put them here. And then schools are encouraged to consult with their IU MTSS regional consultant, which in most cases is going to be me. And then the application that is completed, I've linked it in here in the notes so that you can take a look at it. And the final submissions are due every year by February 15th. So you would notify them of your intent to apply in September, and between September 30th and February 15th, the MTSS IU consultant would come out and conduct the needs assessment, help you put together your evidence that's needed for your application. And I have just a couple slides. The one I want to make sure I share with you that you come back to later and look at is, what are the reasons why folks are not being approved? What are some of the typical errors? And it's really the omission of some of these, right? It's maybe the schedule doesn't have the requisite number of minutes, requisite minutes for core instruction. So when you're thinking about reading at the K-3 level, that's 120 minutes versus grades 4, 5, and 6 is 60 minutes. So, you know, some of those things that can kind of be looked at ahead of time. And this is a great way to do a little bit of readiness. You know, looking at this list of the typical errors that prevent people from being approved and saying to yourself, ooh, is that us? Because then that might help you determine if you want to be if you want to apply. I just want to thank you because we're 2 minutes past our time. I am happy to stay on. I'll stop the recording if you want to ask any questions, but I do just want you to think about, like, what would your next steps be? Whether you're an administrator, school psychologist, or teacher, what are you already doing that is MTSS in your system with fidelity that would lend itself to this RtII process? So what alignment do you already see? Thank you so much. I mean, this has been a great 3 days. We really appreciate all of the attendance and the questions and the engagement. And I'm going to close everything up here in terms of the recording, but I will hang out in case anybody wants to ask any specific questions, because I see lots of comments in the chat and I don't want to miss any of them. So let me stop the recording.